I have always wanted to stay aboard the RMS Queen Mary, permanently docked in Long Beach, California. The vessel was the epitome of ocean liner luxury for a period of time that is now long gone. She's now one of the only ocean liners left in existence, certainly of this era. However, the hotel on board hasn't always had the smoothest sailing, and reviews are mixed at best. But I still wanted to try it out, so I booked a room here with a hope and a prayer. Look, this is going to be a rough video, especially for me. So let's go ahead and climb on board this once grand ocean liner, spend a night in apparently one of their finest suites, and see if it's worth the money. So the Queen Mary is a pretty special ship. She was launched all the way back in 1934, though her actual design was a product of the late 1920s. RMS Queen Mary was not only the flagship of her owner Cunard, but she was the largest passenger liner ever built for her time. Even today, her gross tonnage is an impressive number, comparable to modern cruise ships like the Disney Magic. But the Queen Mary was the pride of Britain, a luxury liner like no other, and one which sailed the transatlantic run for decades. However, following the introduction of jet aircraft and the subsequent decline of ocean liner travel, Cunard ultimately sold the vessel in 1967 to the city of Long Beach in California. She would make one final voyage to the city and would be permanently docked and turned into a museum and hotel. Quite a bit happened after this. There would be highs and lows of the vessel's operation, and there was even a stint through the late 80s and early 90s when Disney had owned the ship. They had planned to incorporate it into a massive development called Port Disney, which ultimately never happened. Years after this though, the ship would trade hands a number of times, and ultimately filed for bankruptcy. There's just so much to the story, so if you want a more in-depth recounting of what happened with all of this, I actually made a video about this whole mess over on my main channel, Brights on Films. The fact that the Queen Mary Hotel was a subject for my bankrupt series kind of tells you all you need to know. Regardless, following a city assessment that claimed that the ship was in dire need of repairs and possibly vulnerable to capsizing, the city did take over control and approved repairs to various critical points of the ship. They would also bring on a third-party hotel management firm called Evolution Hospitality, a company which mainly deals with smaller corporate-style boutique hotels to run the property. The city also approved a historic foundation to continue to raise money for the ongoing restoration. And following the ship being inducted to the Historic Hotels of America, they would also tear down the long-abandoned European village that used to be part of the experience. So there is obviously an effort being made, though I wouldn't say it all pays off. It starts as you pull up to the facility. You're met with a large gateway prompting you to pay for parking, which, even if you're a guest, is $39 a night, which is really insane. Now, much of the parking lot here when we arrived was being used for Dark Harbor, a Halloween event they put on annually and one that seems to be pretty popular. However, the day we arrived, it was a night that they were not running the event, and everything felt pretty barren. It didn't help that the outward aesthetics weren't great. From these gates blocking the seawall straight out of a zombie horror movie, to this decaying Russian submarine, which at one point had partially sunk. It's now completely off limits and effectively sitting there abandoned. Even the retail shop right next to it has weird vibes. It's in this temporary shed style thing and is filled with some pretty bad and frankly disappointing AI art, some of which is for sale. They're so proud of not paying real artists that they have massive banners of this slop on the main entrance structure. Pretty bad, guys. Anyways, I originally booked a 1 king bed deluxe room, a middle tier option that I figured would show what an elevated but average room would look like on the ship. However, when we arrived, we were told that the room type that we booked was no longer available, and that we'd be upgraded to the Royal Suite. Our check-in agent said it was their favorite room on board. Apparently, of the 347 rooms, only around 200 or so were actually in use. The rest, we were told, were not inhabitable following the reopening after COVID. We were told, though, that they are being worked on. Regardless, here's our newly upgraded room, and it's very, very weird. Okay, so obviously this is an old ship, so you're basically sleeping in a museum. But even so, this room was still very strange. When you first walk in, you enter this weird foyer area that has 2 flanking closets divided by curtains. I'm gonna go ahead and assume that these were original, just like this original lovely shelf and bench that I really liked. Although if you immediately turn left, you find yourself in the back rooms. This is a dining area and wet bar, I suppose? While it is straight out of the 1970s, it at least comes with a pretty large mini fridge. This whole foyer area presents you with a lot of options for doors, but if you take the furthest one to the left, you'll find the primary bedroom. In terms of amenities here, it's honestly pretty sparse. There is a single chair that looks like it belongs in a Sheraton from 2002, plus a small TV, a seemingly sloppily installed model that is also very outdated. Although it does have lots of channels, though of course no user interface. Now the room also retains much of its classic design character, from the original AC vents that do not work, to the inoperable electric original fan. However, the vintage light switches do work, as do the many drawers. Storage in here is certainly not an issue. It is a weirdly large space though that seems to lack furniture or any decorations. It's all very Spartan. The bed itself is fine. The sheets feel pretty low quality, as does the mattress, which was a medium firmness. Now, if you think this room looks Spartan, wait until you see our living room. This is the royal suite after all, though the living room space was clearly at one point just another bedroom. You can see by the former headboard which outlines where the bed would have gone. Now, similarly dated furniture dots this massive space. You do get 2 chairs at the far end of the room, along with a complimentary postcard and 2 bottles of water. I at least love to see water is provided. However, the front desk will not give you any more, so to refill them, you have to go to the gym. Now, you also get another TV and a sofa which pulls out into a bed. And that's kinda it in here. Again, there is a ton of additional storage, as well as a second bathroom. The primary one can be found just down the hall from the bedroom, and on one hand, it is pretty cool to see and use these vintage fixtures. I love the fresh and saltwater handles, even though they don't work anymore. Plus all of the small details, which made this a classic ocean-going liner. However, by modern standards, it certainly isn't the best. And that's the thing, in some ways you can excuse the low shower head, curtain, and no vanity space. It makes sense. However, what I am less forgiving of is the condition it was all in. Honestly, this applies to the entire room. Again, you have to remember that this is an extremely old room. However, there's also just stuff that is dirty. Look in most corners and less obvious places, and you'll find areas that are just left filthy. The mirror in the bedroom is all messed up, all of the wood trim pieces are rough, and even the modern phone on the bedside table. Like, what is the excuse for this being dirty? The mirror would be so easy to clean, the phone would be so easy to clean. However, what makes all of this even worse is that there is no air conditioning in this room. In fact, there's no air conditioning in any of the rooms. Now, I'm all for dealing with authentic spaces and living in them how they were originally designed, and thankfully the portholes do open up. But this isn't the North Atlantic anymore. This is hot Long Beach, California, and even Cunard figured that their guest rooms needed air conditioning, which is why they fitted them into the cabins later on. What's especially strange is that all of the public rooms on board do have AC. Regardless, the guest rooms don't, and while they claim that the front desk will do their best to help you cool off with portable fans, we had a very warm sleep in our room. Honestly, a pretty bad sleep too. If you want any sort of breeze, you need to open up those windows. But if you do that, especially on the port side, you'll likely be woken up throughout the night and into the morning by the continuous and loud container ship operations happening nearby. This was honestly probably the worst sleep I've ever gotten so far reviewing places for this channel. Overall, this room was just so weird, and usually I like that. But in this case, it was more weird by the lack of care by the hotel operator than the room itself. It was all very disappointing. Honestly, the vibes were just off, and it all felt a little creepy. It didn't help that when we opened one of the many doors in our cabin, it actually just opened into the occupied room next to ours. Thankfully, no one was in that room when we opened the door, but there was seemingly no lock or anything. So that was kind of unnerving. It's especially quite the contrast between what it was advertised as, a seemingly well-appointed, glossy room. Compare that to what we actually got. I don't know, that's not great. But of course, the room wasn't the only thing you're here for. The rest of the ship is. So as a hotel guest staying on board, there are a decent amount of amenities on offer. Queen Mary Hotel offers a few dining options that cover most price points. Midship Marketplace has pricey Starbucks coffee and equally overpriced to-go bites. But this is still their to-go casual section. None of these looked very appetizing to me though, so I skipped this location. And now looking at its Yelp score, I'm kinda glad I did. However, we did get to try the casual lunch restaurant, the Promenade Cafe, which takes up a section of the starboard side promenade, and while it is pretty out of date and sort of rough around the edges, it did provide good views and surprisingly decent food. The French fries were particularly very good, and I was happy with my club sandwich. I was less happy about the price, however, as both Emmy and I's sandwich came out to nearly $56 after tip, which is pretty expensive. Likewise is the Chelsea Chowder House and Bar, which we went to for dinner. This is also a very tired-looking space, and one that had generally mediocre food. Our friend Michael got the halibut, which came highly recommended by our waiter, though for $48, it was shockingly bad. So bad, in fact, that he didn't even finish it. We all agreed that it tasted and smelled bizarrely similar to a scented Glade trash bag. Emmy and I, however, got much less traumatized, and both got the chowder and a salad, plus an additional drink that Emmy got. Both food items were decent, I would say just fine. In total, it came out to $106 after tip, which was extremely expensive for the quality of food that we got. This was a total ripoff. Along with these eateries, there's also the Observation Bar, where Emmy and I got some drinks, both of which came to $32 after tip. Mine tasted fine, I liked it. However, Emmy's Moscow Mule was clearly some sort of mystery concoction, attempting to mimic ginger beer, and was so tart that she had a hard time getting through it. But in all honesty, it was a bit justified by just how cool this forward bar is. It's mostly unchanged from the ship's seagoing days, and it's a genuinely beautiful space. The live karaoke was kind of a weird vibe, but this was certainly the heart of the evenings on board. People were having a lot of fun here throughout the night, which was surprising and fun to see. I could easily spend a lot more time here. Now, if you're a non-guest visiting the Queen Mary, it's around $45 to gain entry. That will get you a guided tour on board and access to self-tour the ship. As a guest, you're already paying a $23 resort fee per room per night, and that goes to the preservation of the ship, but that also means that you can tour the vessel at your own leisure. That's the real amenity you're getting here. Unlimited access to the RMS Queen Mary, a 1930s ocean liner that you get to explore yourself, anytime, day or night. For me, that's insanely cool, and the historical significance of this ship is truly one of a kind. Now, only designated portions of the ship are accessible to guests. This isn't just a free-for-all. In fact, I'm sure that more than half of the ship is off-limits to guests, which is kind of a shame. It would be cool to get into some unique small nooks and crannies of the liner, but I also get why that isn't the case. What's a little more disappointing though is how many of the unique spaces on board were closed off for private events. The Queen's Salon Room, probably the most famous grand space on board, being one of them. Both the day we checked in and the morning that we left, it was in use. A huge shame, as I would have loved to have seen it. There's also something to be said about how many unique spaces have been lost over time. In fact, many of them were lost when the vessel was first converted to a hotel. Spaces like the second-class swimming pool, the second-class writing room and library, the garden lounge. I mean, there was so much more that was removed just in place of storage and I guess hotel operations. Many of those former grand spaces are sitting underutilized today. But that's not to say there aren't really cool spaces on board to explore. Just being able to walk the foredeck right up to the bow is just a spectacular sight. Even strolling the promenade or the boat deck is such a fascinating experience, imagining this massive liner at sea. It is really something special. I also really like the exhibits they have strewn about. Aside from all the small details and staircases and whatnot that might remind you of what once was, there's also some smaller, subtle exhibits that have full recreations of the spaces they once were. Larger and more formal exhibits can be found elsewhere, like on the bridge, completely intact as it once was. Over on the promenade, you'll find the ship model gallery, ranging from everything like the Costa Classica, now Margaritaville at Sea, to a larger cross-section of the Titanic and Normandy. Which, by the way, I forgot how incredibly beautiful Normandy's interiors were, my god. I also really like the Cunard Story exhibit, a series of models of modern Cunard ships, mostly built by maritime replicas, plus some other fun Cunard-related memorabilia. Oh hey, it's John Cleese! A few decks down, you can view the no longer accessible first-class pool area and the stern exhibits. You actually have to walk outside on the elevated pathways to get here, but when you do, it's pretty cool. You have some museum-like exhibits on the SS United States, the Queen Elizabeth, some movie sets, and of course the best part, the engine room. You can tour a good section of it, and walking through this massive area is again, pretty awe-inspiring. Even better though, except for those who have some mechanophobia, is the underwater propeller. It's contained within this concrete structure that jets out the side of the ship. With a walking platform that surrounds it and a spotlight illuminating the water below, you can view one of the 4 underwater propeller blades in its entirety. Despite its slight creepiness, I love it. I think it's really cool. You can tell that back in the day when this was all set up, people were really excited to make this grand ship into a lifelong attraction. But it also feels like those days are long gone, and that it's been quite a struggle to keep up with the pressure of deterioration, both physically and in public interest. The optimistic views of the Queen Mary coming to Long Beach have waned over the decades. Both the public and operators have seemingly lost interest in the ship, and today, its lack of maintenance is a constant and persistent headline. While most of the interior spaces on board, apart from the rooms, generally seem well cared for, its lack of maintenance is especially pronounced on the upper decks. Both bridge wings are permanently blocked off, staircases are deteriorating, decking removed, and full spaces are left empty or underused. The true age of this ship can clearly be seen up here, and it just makes you want a better future for the vessel. Certainly, the current experience, particularly as a hotel guest, just doesn't feel like it matches the grandeur and experience they're aiming for. The experience that should be on offer here. No offense to the hotel operator currently in place here, but most things just feel like an amateur operation. Everything from the flimsy booking site, the mediocre staging on board and amenities, to the blatant AI that dots the entrances. It's actually really annoying to see stuff like that. So maybe a little bit of offense given. Overall though, I can honestly forgive a lot of these issues if the price matches the hospitality experience. So then, what did we end up paying for our room? Well, remember, we booked a deluxe cabin, and the total for one night came to $320 with tax. Ugh. Now of course, this isn't the cheapest category you can get. The cheapest is an inside room, and rates for that start at around $203. This is while a basic porthole cabin can be had for around $222. The deluxe room that we originally booked can be had for a low of around $241, while the full suite that we ended up getting starts at around $422 a night. Since the Queen Mary operators have embraced its haunted reputation, legitimate or not, they also allow you to book their apparently especially haunted cabin, B340. That goes for around $700 a night. Now, all of these rates do include tax, but not parking, which again is $39 a night. But how does this compare to other hotels in the area? Obviously, we're talking apples to oranges. One is a 1930s ocean liner, and the other is a building. But regardless, across the bay in downtown Long Beach, you can stay at the newly renovated Fairmont Breakers, a 5-star hotel, for $286. Honestly, take your pick of hotels in Long Beach. Most have price points that start similarly or cheaper than the Queen Mary. So when you look at the value proposition here, the story of why it's been a struggling property for so long begins to make a lot more sense. Now, none of this is to say you shouldn't support the Queen Mary and the preservationists working hard to keep her where she is. I think you should absolutely support the preservation of the ship, and I definitely think the Queen Mary deserves to exist. I spent most of my time on board marveling at how lucky we are that this thing even exists in today's world, especially against very obvious odds. However, I think most would also agree that the ship has not been properly cared for or managed. So unfortunately, thanks to that, the consumer hospitality experience on board, today at least, is just not good. And it's no wonder why it's been failing on and off for years. When you have a luxury 5-star hotel downtown, also in a historic location, priced less than what we've paid, why would the average non-paranormal or ship enthusiast choose this over that? But okay, let's give the Queen Mary an actual rated score. I call my scoring system Jake's Is It Any Good score, and it's based on 5 categories, each out of 10, for potential perfect score, 50 out of 50. We'll start with the location, and already, right off the bat, this isn't great. Queen Mary is located in the dense, industrial harbor of Long Beach. While the views on the starboard side of the city and ocean are good, amenities outside the ship are extremely lacking. If you want to walk into town, it would be a very unpleasant 30-minute walk. However, I do also understand that in the context of this hotel, most people are coming here and staying put throughout their stay. Still though, I mean, its location is not great. It's a dismal 4 out of 10. Amenities are mostly being propped up by the ship itself. It's a stunning vessel, and the novelty that you get to explore it day and night when staying here is pretty cool. That said, your food options are lackluster and expensive at best, and even with a few smaller amenities like a modern gym, I really don't think I could give it any more than a 5 out of 10. Luxury and quality is also not that great. Any quality or luxury for the price point here is stemming from the craftsmanship made in the 1930s. Anything more recent that has been added on board is just fine. It's very generic and very bland, certainly not at the level of what we paid. Luxury for that price then is disappointingly pretty bad, especially in our room, which didn't even have basic amenities or functions like air conditioning or a coffee table. As a hotel, the luxury and quality you're getting is just not meeting the price points. It's a 4 out of 10. Service was fine. It wasn't anything special for the price points. I definitely wouldn't call it worthy of the title unmatched service like they claim on their website. We did have some weird, maybe some would call rude moments with the staff. I won't get into it, but I think it's a 5 out of 10. Value is rough. The room we got typically goes for around $422 plus a night. And even at the rate we got, $320, I don't know, I think this is way too much for the product that we received. And I think it's pretty generous to give it a 3 out of 10. That brings the total score to 21 out of 40. Which, it's not good. That tragically puts it as one of the lowest hotels I've yet to review, and on par with other very poor hotel values. Again, not an indictment on the ship itself, more so on the hotel operator. In the end, I was really disappointed, and honestly a little angry with the Queen Mary Hotel. This is a one-of-a-kind piece of history. One of, if not the last great ocean liners left in existence. And somehow, over the years, her operators had let the condition of the ship get to a pretty sad point. While the museum aspect of the ship does seem to operate well, the hospitality side of the business is just bad. Everything from the restaurants to the rooms all feel dated, low quality, yet still very expensive. In my opinion, which let's face it is uninformed and nobody asked for, I think the ship needs a lot of investment and a new mentality. If they want to make a world-class hotel product here, which I think it's very capable of being, then they need to go more premium. Build out a tasteful and faithful update to the rooms, bring them in line with other premium floating hotel experiences like the Fingal, or even the proposed concept for the SS United States. Make it feel a lot more upscale and boutique. You can then raise the prices accordingly and refine the experience. There was even a very real proposal to renovate everything back in 2016, and the renderings for that renovation seemed pretty promising. Honestly, exactly what I would want. So spend some effort on board, but then also build out the vast parking lot area. Make this into an entertainment hub, a place people would actually want to make a trip out to visit. And look, I get this is a very complicated situation. I understand sinking development money into this requires a committed, deep-pocketed developer that has a passionate vision. But in a world where we can find VCs that pump hundreds of millions of dollars into nonsense companies, then surely we can find some money somewhere to preserve one of the last ocean liners in existence. A massive piece of history that is otherwise being neglected. Because in its current state, consumers just won't choose to stay here over other, cheaper, more modern, and cleaner options. I know I wouldn't choose to stay here again, and I'm their exact target guest. Look, I love the novelty of staying on board a real great ocean liner. I just can't say it was a comfortable enough experience, especially for the price. But for the sake of this ship and its legacy, I really hope things improve, and this hospitality product becomes a lot more refined and accessible for people at an extended level of comfort. With all that said, you should absolutely come and see the ship yourself. It is absolutely spectacular. But as always, what do you think? Have I been too harsh here, or is the Queen Mary a sinking product that desperately needs help? Let me know in the comments, which, as always, I read every single one. Until next time, my name is Jake, and thank you very much for watching.